3 wagons broke the tree line like a slow-moving storm. Dorothy stood inside the cabin with a ring in her palm, her fingers shaking so hard the silver kept slipping against her skin. She pressed it to her chest like that could steady the pounding in her ribs. Outside, the sound wasn't one set of hooves. It was many. Josiah went to the window and froze. The muscles in his jaw tightened, and for a second, he didn't look like a mountain man at all. He looked like a man who'd seen this exact shape of trouble before and knew what it cost. "Harlan," he whispered, the word coming out like ash. "Harlan's men." Dorothy moved to the crack between the door and the frame. Through that narrow slice of daylight, she saw them. 3 wagons, not a trader's train, not a family ride. Clean wheels, well-fed horses, men who traveled with purpose. The first wagon stopped, and a man stepped down like the ground belonged to him. Cyrus Harlan, 50, maybe a little older, dressed in a dark coat, cut too fine for the mountains. A silver-topped cane rested easy in his hand, not because he needed it, but because he liked the way it looked. Power made into flesh, power made into manners. Behind him came 6 gunmen in a loose line, boots crunching the snow. Hands stayed near their holsters like muscle memory. The kind of men who didn't need to threaten loud because their bodies already said it. Josiah opened the cabin door and stepped out before they could come closer. He didn't talk first. He positioned himself, one broad back between the wagons and the home behind him, one man choosing where danger would land. Cyrus Harlan smiled as if this were a business meeting. "McKenna," he called, a voice calm and heavy. "We can do this the easy way." Josiah didn't move. "Turn around." Harlan's smile thinned. "Land can be taken, lives can be taken, and the law." He lifted his cane slightly, almost like a toast. "The law can be bought." Dorothy's breath caught. 6 guns, 3 wagons, 1 man in the snow with no weapon in his hands. The balance of strength felt cruel. And we're not going to explain yet why Cyrus Harlan mattered so much. Not here. Not in the first 30 seconds. Because right now, all you need to feel is this. It's not rumors anymore. It's real. Before we rewind and uncover why everything came this close to bloodshed, tell me, where are you right now, and what are you doing as you listen to this story? Cyrus Harlan stopped 10 paces from the cabin and planted his cane in the snow, as if marking a boundary no one else was allowed to cross. "Let's be clear," he said calmly. "I didn't come up here for noise. I came for resolution." Josiah stood with his boots shoulder-width apart, hands empty, shoulders squared. "You're trespassing," Harlan chuckled. "On unregistered land?" He turned slightly, gesturing with the tip of his cane. "Funny thing about land in Montana Territory. If the papers aren't filed in Helena, ownership is flexible." One of the gunmen shifted his weight. Another spat into the snow. "The old sheriff ruled this place mine," Josiah said evenly. "Self-defense, lawful claim." "The old sheriff is dead," Harlan replied, not missing a beat. "The new one understands how the world works." Dorothy's stomach dropped. She watched from the doorway now, no longer hiding. Josiah felt it the second she stepped closer, felt the pull of responsibility tighten across his back. Harlan's eyes flicked past Josiah and landed on her. "So this is her," he said lightly. "The girl everyone's whispering about." Dorothy straightened, despite the heat rising in her face. Harlan looked her over slowly, deliberately. "You must be very convincing," he continued, voice slick. "A man like McKenna doesn't change his ways for nothing." Josiah's hands curled into fists. "Careful," Harlan said, almost kindly. "I'd hate for things to get misunderstood." "You came to threaten me," Josiah said. "Say it." Harlan's smile vanished. "I came to offer you mercy." He stepped closer. The gunman spread just enough to be noticed. "You leave this land in 3 days," Harlan said. "Sign over your claim. Walk away alive. Or I come back with a warrant and a rope." "And my family?" Josiah asked. Harlan shrugged. "That depends on how cooperative you are." The air snapped. Josiah took a single step forward. 6 hands dropped to gun grips. "Josiah!" Dorothy's voice broke the tension. She stepped past him. The shotgun was heavy in her hands. She had never fired it. She didn't pretend otherwise. But she lifted it anyway, arms shaking, barrel pointed straight at Cyrus Harlan's chest. Every sound stopped. "I don't know how to shoot," Dorothy said, voice thin but clear. "But I know how close you are." Harlan blinked. He hadn't expected that. Josiah turned sharply. "Dorothy, don't—" "I won't fire," she said, not taking her eyes off Harlan. "But I won't move either." One of the gunmen laughed nervously. "Boss, she's bluffing." "Maybe," Dorothy said. "But maybe I fall, and when I fall this gun goes off, and when it does, you won't like where it points." Harlan studied her, really studied her now, not her body, her stance, the way she didn't flinch. Something ugly crossed his face. Then he smiled again, slow and cold. 3 days, he said, stepping back. "Pack your things. Decide what matters." He tipped his hat, not to Josiah, but to Dorothy. "I admire loyalty," he added, "even misplaced loyalty." The wagons turned. Snow cracked under wheels. The gunmen mounted up. When they were gone, the mountain felt too quiet. Dorothy lowered the gun. Her knees buckled. Josiah caught her before she hit the ground. "You shouldn't have done that," he said, breath ragged. "I know," she whispered, "but I couldn't let him talk to you like that." They stood there, shaking, the echo of hooves still hanging in the air. 3 days, that was all they had. The mountains stayed quiet after Harlan's wagons disappeared, but it wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that comes after something breaks. Dorothy didn't realize she was shaking until the shotgun slipped from her hands and hit the porch boards with a dull thud. Her legs gave out at the same time. She sank down hard, breath coming in short, uneven gasps, as if her body was only now asking permission to feel fear. Josiah was beside her instantly. He didn't speak. He didn't tell her to be strong. He didn't ask questions. He wrapped his arms around her and pulled her against his chest. It was the first time he'd held her like that, not in urgency, not to catch her from falling, but to keep her upright when the world tilted too far. His coat smelled like wood smoke and cold air. His heart beat slow and steady against her ear, grounding her when her own refused to calm. "They would have killed you," she whispered. "I saw it in their eyes." Josiah's jaw tightened. "They would have tried." Dorothy let out a broken laugh that turned into a sob. "I didn't think. My body moved." "That wasn't instinct," he said quietly. "That was courage." She shook her head against his chest. "No. Courage would have been knowing what to do. Courage would have been having a plan." Josiah closed his eyes. "The real fear," he said, "isn't what they'll do to me." She pulled back slightly to look at him. His face was carved with something deeper than anger now. It was calculation, history. "It's what happens to you and the children if I lose," he continued. "If they take me in chains, this place doesn't protect you anymore." Dorothy swallowed hard. "Then we leave." The words came fast, desperate. "We pack tonight. We go north, east, anywhere. We don't wait for them to come back." Josiah looked at the cabin, at the walls he'd built, at the land he'd bled into. "I've run before," he said. "It doesn't end things. It just follows you longer." She pressed her forehead to his. "Then what do we do?" For a long moment, he didn't answer. The children watched from the doorway, silent and afraid. Emma's eyes searched Josiah's face, already trying to be older than she was. Josiah finally spoke, his voice low. "There are things you don't know yet about Harlan, about Mary, about why this didn't end 2 years ago." Dorothy felt her chest tighten. "Things that will make me want to run?" "No," he said. "Things that will make you understand why he won't stop." He took her hands, rough palms enclosing hers. "If you want to leave after I tell you," he added, "I won't stop you." She met his gaze and didn't look away. "Then tell me," she said, "because I'm done being afraid of the dark without knowing what's in it." The fire crackled inside the cabin. Outside, the mountain waited. The fire burned low by the time Josiah began, not because he hadn't fed it, but because some stories demand quiet, demand space, demand that nothing else compete with them. Dorothy sat across from him on the wooden bench, both hands wrapped around a tin cup gone cold. She didn't interrupt. She didn't rush him. She waited the way someone waits when they know what's coming will hurt, but also knows it has to be heard. Josiah stared into the flames. "Mary didn't die all at once," he said. "That's the part people don't understand." Dorothy felt her chest tighten. "She got sick in the winter," he continued. "Cough at first, fever that came and went. We thought it was just the cold. Everyone did. By the time we knew it was consumption, it was already too deep in her lungs." He swallowed. "The doctor in town told us the truth. There was medicine that could slow it, maybe even save her, but it had to come from the east, and it wasn't cheap." Dorothy nodded slowly. She already knew what it meant when money stood between a family and survival. "I sold what I could," Josiah said. "Traps, pelts, tools, but it wasn't enough, so I went to Harlan." He let out a short, humorless breath. "That was my mistake." Dorothy didn't say his name. She didn't need to. "He welcomed me like an old friend," Josiah went on. "Poured whiskey, asked about the land, about the spring, said he admired a man who carved a life out of nothing." The fire popped. "He offered a loan," Josiah said, "for the medicine. 6 months to repay. Fair interest. Said it was just business." Dorothy's fingers tightened around the cup. "I signed," Josiah said quietly, "because Mary was coughing blood into a rag that same night." He finally looked at Dorothy then, his eyes rimmed red, not with tears, but with something older and heavier. A week later, the paper changed. Dorothy's breath caught. "Changed how?" "New terms," he said. 3 months instead of 6. Interest doubled. Clause added, if I defaulted, the land transferred immediately. No appeal." "That's fraud," Dorothy whispered. "Yes," Josiah said. "But fraud is hard to prove when the man committing it owns the sheriff." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I confronted him," he said. "He smiled, said I should have read the fine print better." Dorothy closed her eyes. "When the 3rd month came," Josiah continued, "Mary couldn't stand without help. I was days late, Just days. His voice roughened. That's when the men came. He didn't describe them in detail. He didn't need to. 3 hired guns, he said. They told me Harlan wanted the deed signed. I told them to leave. He paused. They didn't. Dorothy's heart pounded. I fought because I had no choice, Josiah said. I fought because Mary was inside and my children were behind her. He exhaled slowly. When it was over, 3 men were dead, and I was still standing. Dorothy didn't flinch. She didn't recoil. She listened. The sheriff ruled it self-defense, Josiah said. Harlan smiled again, said we'd speak later. The fire crackled louder, as if leaning in. And then, Josiah said, his voice dropping to almost nothing, the medicine stopped coming. Dorothy felt something cold spread through her chest. Harlan controlled the supply, Josiah said. Every apothecary within 3 days' ride. He didn't ban me outright. He just delayed, shorted doses, raised prices until I couldn't pay. Dorothy shook her head slowly, horror dawning. He didn't have to touch her, Josiah said. Didn't have to raise a hand. His jaw clenched. He just waited. The silence after that sentence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Mary died in the spring, Josiah said, holding my hand, asking me not to blame myself. Dorothy's eyes filled, but she didn't speak. I buried her on the ridge, he continued, and I stayed, because if I left, then everything she fought for meant nothing. He finally turned to Dorothy fully. Harlan didn't just want the land, he said. He wanted me broken, wanted me to know he could take a life without ever pulling a trigger. Dorothy stood then, slowly, deliberately, and crossed the small space between them. She didn't argue. She didn't say he should have done something different. She knelt and wrapped her arms around him. Josiah stiffened for a moment, then sagged, forehead resting against her shoulder like a man who had been holding a weight far too long. This isn't your guilt to carry, Dorothy whispered. It never was. His breath hitched once. I should have seen it, he said. I should have protected her better. Dorothy pulled back just enough to look at him. You fought, she said. You loved. You stayed. Harlan committed the crime, not you. He looked at her as if hearing that truth for the first time. Outside, the wind pressed against the cabin walls. Inside, something shifted, slow, painful, but real. After a long while, Dorothy spoke again. Now I understand, she said. Josiah met her eyes. Understand what? Why he won't stop, she said, and why running won't save us. She straightened her back, and why we're going to need the truth. The fire had burned down to embers by the time Dorothy spoke again. For a long while after Josiah finished, neither of them moved. The story still hung in the air between them, heavy, undeniable. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was shape. It had edges now, a beginning, a cause. Josiah broke the silence first. You don't owe me anything, he said quietly. Not after hearing that. If you want to leave before dawn, I'll saddle the horse myself. Dorothy looked at the floor, at her hands, at the faint scar on her knuckle from years of scrubbing other people's messes. Then she lifted her head. No, she said. Josiah frowned. Dorothy, I've run my whole life, she continued, her voice steadier than she expected. Not always with my feet, sometimes just by shrinking, by staying quiet, by letting people decide who I was before I ever opened my mouth. She met his eyes, and it never kept me safe. Josiah searched her face, as if trying to find the moment she might break. It didn't come. "Harlan wants you gone," Dorothy said. "Not because you're weak, because you didn't bend. And now he thinks fear will finish what money started." She stood, wiping her palms on her skirt. "I won't give him that." Josiah shook his head slowly. "You don't understand what you're stepping into." "I understand more than you think," she said. "I understand what it's like to be told you're disposable, to be used because no one believes you'll fight back." She took a breath. "And I understand something else now." She stepped closer, lowering her voice, not in doubt, but in certainty. "You have the truth," Dorothy said, "and I know how to make people listen." Josiah stiffened. "The town won't stand against him." "They already are," she replied. "They just don't know it yet." He looked at her, confused. "They've been whispering about me for weeks," she said, "watching, judging, waiting for me to fail." A small, humorless smile crossed her face. "Which means they're paying attention." Josiah let out a slow breath. "This isn't a church meeting, Dorothy. This is a man who buys sheriffs." "And I'm a woman they underestimated," she said simply. She reached for his hand, not for comfort, but to anchor him. "You survived Harlan alone once," she continued. "This time, you won't." The children had gathered near the doorway again, quiet as shadows. Emma watched Dorothy with something like awe. Dorothy glanced at them and felt her resolve harden. "They took Mary because no one stood up," she said. "I won't let them take you the same way." Josiah's throat worked. "If this goes wrong, then it goes wrong standing," Dorothy said, "not running." She squeezed his hand once. "Tomorrow," she said, "I go down the mountain." Josiah's eyes widened. "Alone?" She nodded. "I'll stand in front of them," she said. "All of them, as exactly who I am." She looked back at him, unafraid. "And I'll tell the truth so clearly they won't be able to look away." The embers glowed brighter as the fire shifted. For the first time since Harlan arrived, Josiah felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Hope. Dorothy rode into Pine Hollow just after midday. She hadn't been back since the day they sent her away, bundled onto a wagon like a problem no one wanted to solve. The street looked the same. Wooden storefronts, muddy ruts, people pausing mid-step when they saw who was coming. Whispers followed her before words did. "That's her. The one from the mountain." "She didn't run?" Dorothy dismounted slowly. Her legs ached from the ride. Her hands still smelled faintly of leather and cold iron, but she stood straight. She didn't rush. She didn't hide. She walked first to the church. The doors were open. Inside, a few women turned, startled to see her. One of them was Helen Pritchard. Mrs. Pritchard stiffened. "Dorothy Brennan?" "Yes," Dorothy said. Her voice echoed more than she expected. "I need the bell rung." "For what purpose?" Pritchard asked sharply. Dorothy met her gaze. "For the truth." That was enough. Within an hour, the church was full. Men who had traded pelts with Josiah McKenna. Women who had whispered about Dorothy's body and her place. Shopkeepers. Ranch hands. Curiosity packed the pews tighter than faith ever had. Dorothy stood alone at the front. No Josiah, no children, no one to hide behind. She took a breath and began, not loud, not trembling, but clear. "My name is Dorothy Brennan," she said, "and most of you already think you know who I am." A ripple of discomfort moved through the room. "You know me as the fat girl," she continued. "The charity case, the woman No one wanted to hire. The one you sent up the mountain because you assumed I would either fail quietly or disappear. No one interrupted. I'm not here to beg, Dorothy said, and I'm not here to ask forgiveness for surviving. She lifted her chin. I lived with Josiah McKenna and his 4 children. I cooked, I cleaned, I taught those children to read. I watched a man who works himself to the bone to keep his family alive. She paused. And I watched a powerful man try to take everything from him without ever lifting a gun. A murmur spread. Dorothy reached into her bag and placed a stack of papers on the pulpit. Cyrus Harlan, she said, you know his name. You know his money. What you don't know is how he uses it. She didn't shout. She didn't dramatize. She told the story the way truth needs to be told, straight, about the loan, the altered terms, the hired gunman, the medicine that stopped arriving. Mary McKenna didn't die because of fate, Dorothy said. She died because a man decided land was worth more than a life. Someone gasped. A man stood halfway, then sat again. Where's your proof? A voice called. Dorothy didn't flinch. These, she said, tapping the papers, are copies of the loan agreement. These are letters demanding repayment under changed terms. These are receipts showing the same apothecaries refusing medicine after years of selling it only to the McKennas. She turned slightly. And these, she said, came from the records of the late Sheriff Dalton. All eyes went to Mrs. Pritchard. Helen Pritchard rose slowly, her face tight but composed. I verified the documents, she said. They are legitimate. The room erupted. And the land? Someone shouted. Dorothy answered before anyone else could. Unregistered, yes, but claimed, worked, and defended for 10 years, which gives Josiah McKenna standing under territorial law. Mrs. Grant stood next, voice firm. My husband agrees. Silence fell again, this time heavy with realization. Dorothy took a breath. Her chest burned, but she kept going. I'm not asking you to feel sorry for me, she said, and I'm not asking you to pity Josiah. She looked across the crowd, meeting eyes one by one. I'm asking you to decide who you are. A shift moved through the room, not agreement yet, but attention. Because if you let Cyrus Harlan take that land, Dorothy said, you're telling him he can take any of yours, quietly, legally, or without blood. Her voice hardened. I won't accept that, and neither should you. She stepped back from the pulpit. I'm done being sent away, she said, and I'm done being afraid. No applause came at first. Then someone stood. Then another. Stories followed, short at first, then louder. A farmer cheated on feed prices. A widow denied credit. Medicine withheld. Land pressured. The pattern emerged, undeniable. Dorothy stood there as the town found its spine, not because she demanded it, but because she showed them where it was. When she finally stepped down, Mrs. Pritchard caught her arm. You were very brave, the older woman said quietly. Dorothy shook her head. No, I was done running. Outside, the bell rang once more, this time not as a warning, but as a call. The change didn't happen all at once. Why, it started small. Quiet conversation spilling out of the church and onto the muddy street. Men who had avoided each other now stood shoulder to shoulder. Women who once whispered now spoke plainly. Dorothy watched it unfold from the steps. No one was looking at her body anymore. They were listening. Thomas Wright, the blacksmith, was the first to raise his voice outside. Harlan ruined my father, he said, loud enough for the square to hear. Bought our iron cheap, sold it back dear. We thought it was business. It wasn't. It was pressure. A murmur followed. Mrs. Cole stepped forward next, wringing her hands. He controlled the medicine shipments. If you crossed him, prices doubled. If you owed him, you waited. A rancher nodded. He tried to buy my creek. When I said no, my grazing permits disappeared. Each story stacked on the next, not dramatic, not heroic, just real. That was the most dangerous part. Dorothy felt it then, the shift from fear to recognition, from "this is happening to me" to "this is happening to us." Mrs. Grant stood with her back straight, voice carrying authority. This is no longer a private matter. This is a pattern. And patterns, Mrs. Pritchard added carefully, can be proven. Heads turned. Helen Pritchard had once been the sharpest judge in town. Now her tone was different, measured, almost humbled. "We can't stop Harlan alone," someone said. "He has the sheriff." Dorothy stepped forward again, but this time she didn't stand alone. "We don't need to fight him with guns," she said. "We fight him with witnesses, with records, with numbers." A man in the back asked, "And when he comes back up the mountain?" Thomas Wright answered before Dorothy could. "Then he won't be coming for one man. He'll be facing a town." The words hung in the cold air. No cheering, no grand gestures, just nods. Decisions followed, practical ones. A petition drafted that night. Signatures gathered by lantern light. A writer sent toward Helena before dawn, carrying copies of every document Dorothy had shown. Someone asked Dorothy if she wanted to sign first. She shook her head. "Last," she said. "This isn't about me leading. It's about us standing." By sunset, Pine Hollow had chosen its side. Dorothy rode back up the mountain alone. The climb felt different now, not heavier, but steadier. When Josiah saw her crest the ridge, he came out onto the porch, worry etched deep into his face. She dismounted and walked straight into his arms. "They listened," she said quietly, "not because of who I am, but because they finally saw who he is." Josiah held her a moment longer than before. "And now?" he asked. "Now," Dorothy said, looking back toward the valley. "We wait, and we don't stand alone anymore." The mountain wind moved through the pines. For the first time, it didn't sound like warning. It sounded like resolve. They came at noon, not at dawn, not under cover of darkness, but in full daylight, the way men do when they believe the law belongs to them. Dorothy heard the hooves first, slow, deliberate, too many to count without thinking. Josiah stepped out of the cabin, shotgun resting against the porch rail, not raised. Behind him, the children stood silent, pressed together like they understood more than they should. 3 wagons this time. Cyrus Harlan rode at the front, clean as ever, coat buttoned, hat untouched by dust. Beside him sat Sheriff Reeves, red-faced and stiff, a folded paper clenched in his hand like it might bite him back. Behind them, armed men, more than before. Harlan smiled when he saw Josiah. "You had your 3 days." Reeves cleared his throat. "Josiah McKenna, by order of—" "Wait," Dorothy said. She stepped forward, past Josiah, past the porch. Her boots sank slightly into the dirt, but she didn't slow. Harlan raised a brow. "Still playing brave?" Before Dorothy could answer, someone else did. "Sheriff?" The voice didn't come from the wagons. It came from the road behind them. Reeves turned. So did Harlan. Horses crested the ridge. 6 this time, riders upright and calm. At the front, rode a man in a gray coat, a badge catching the sun at his chest. U.S. Marshal. He reined in slowly, eyes moving over the scene, the wagons, the guns, the line of townspeople now forming behind Dorothy and Josiah. "Yes?" Reeves said, his voice suddenly smaller. The marshal dismounted. "John Brennan," he said, "I believe you're serving an arrest warrant that's been contested." Harlan scoffed. "This is a local matter." Brennan met his gaze without blinking. "Not anymore." He nodded to another rider, who handed him a thick packet of papers. Complaints from Pine Hollow, witness statements, financial records, evidence of coercion, fraudulent land claims, and interference with medical supply routes. Harlan's smile thinned. "Allegations." "Enough to open a federal inquiry," Brennan said, "and enough to suspend local enforcement pending review." Reeves swallowed hard. I didn't know this was coming." "No," Brennan said evenly, "but you should have known better." The marshal turned slightly, addressing the gathered crowd. "Until this investigation is complete, no arrests will be made here today." Harlan stepped forward, cane digging into the dirt. "You think this ends me?" Dorothy looked at him then, not with fear, not with anger, just clarity. "This ends what you can do to us," she said. Brennan nodded to his deputies. "Cyrus Harlan, you're under arrest for fraud, extortion, and conspiracy to obstruct justice." For a moment, no one moved. Then metal rang out, handcuffs closing. The sound carried farther than gunfire ever could. Reeves was cuffed next. He didn't protest. As the wagons turned back down the road, the town didn't cheer. They stood still, watching until the dust settled. Only then did Dorothy exhale. Josiah came to stand beside her, one arm settling around her shoulders, steady and sure. "You did this," he said quietly. She shook her head. "We did." The marshal approached them last. "Your land is safe, Mr. McKenna, for now." Josiah nodded. "Thank you." Brennan looked at Dorothy. "Took courage to stand first." She smiled faintly. "I was tired of being pushed." That night, the mountain was quiet again. No hooves, no threats, just the sound of wind moving through pine needles, and a town that had finally remembered how to stand together. When the dust finally settled, the mountain felt different. Not quieter, just honest. The wagons were gone. The guns were gone. And for the first time in years, Josiah McKenna stood on his own land without feeling like someone was counting the days until it was taken from him. The marshal's men returned once more before sunset. Papers were signed, boundaries redrawn. The spring, once the reason for all the bloodless violence, was confirmed as McKenna land, free and clear. When it was over, Josiah sat heavily on the porch steps, elbows on his knees, staring at the dirt like he didn't quite trust the ground beneath him yet. Dorothy sat beside him. "I thought justice would feel louder," she said quietly. Josiah let out a dry breath. "So did I." He looked at her then, really looked, not as the woman who arrived shaking in the snow, not as the girl the town whispered about, but as the person who had stood in front of wagons and guns and a powerful man and hadn't moved. "I lived here 10 years, he said, fought, bled, buried my wife, raised my kids alone, and none of that saved me." He swallowed. "You did?" Dorothy shook her head instinctively. "I just told the truth." "That's what saved me," Josiah said. "I knew the truth. I carried it every day, but I didn't know how to make anyone hear it." He turned his palm upward. She placed her hand in it, small against his calloused fingers. Inside the cabin, the children watched through the window. Emma leaned her head against the glass. Jacob whispered something to Samuel that made him smile. Lily pressed her hand to the pane like she was holding the moment in place. Down the mountain, Pine Hollow was changing too. That night, lamps burned later than usual. People talked, not in whispers this time, but openly, about Harlan, about the sheriff, about all the times they'd looked away because it was easier, and about Dorothy Brennan, not the fat girl, not the charity case, not the woman who had been sent away, but the one who stood up and didn't ask permission. Justice, it turned out, didn't belong to the men with money or the men with badges. It belonged to the people brave enough to claim it. The wedding was not announced with posters or bells. It happened because no one wanted to wait anymore. Word spread the same way everything important in Pine Hollow did, quietly, from mouth to mouth. By the time Sunday morning came, the church was already warm with bodies and candlelight, boots scraping against old wood. Coats hung wherever there was space. Dorothy stood in the small side room, hands folded over her middle, breathing slowly. Her dress was simple cotton, white but not pristine. Mrs. Cole had sewn it by hand, altering it twice so it would fit without apology. There was no corset, no attempt to make her smaller, just clean lines, soft fabric, room to breathe. Helen Pritchard pinned a small cluster of wildflowers into Dorothy's hair. Her hands trembled slightly. I spent too many years believing respect had to be earned through perfection, Helen said quietly. I was wrong. Dorothy didn't answer. She only nodded. Outside, Josiah waited near the front pew, tall and still, wearing a white shirt that felt unfamiliar against his skin. He had shaved his beard down, trimmed it neat, though the scars along his jaw remained. He hadn't tried to hide them. The children stood beside him. Emma held Lily's hand with a seriousness that made Josiah smile despite himself. Jacob and Samuel fidgeted until Josiah rested a hand on each of their shoulders. They stilled instantly. When Dorothy stepped into the aisle, the room went silent, not from shock, but recognition. She didn't float. She didn't glide. She walked. Every step was deliberate, grounded, chosen. Josiah felt his throat tighten in a way no gunfight ever had. This woman had stood between him and ruin, between his children and fear, and now she was walking toward him without hesitation. When she reached him, he took her hands without asking. The preacher cleared his throat but said little. No long sermon, no lecture on duty, just a question. Josiah McKenna, he said, do you take Dorothy Brennan not because you must, but because you choose to stand beside you in hardship and peace? Josiah didn't look away from her. I do, he said. His voice was rough. I choose her. And Dorothy Brennan, the preacher continued, do you take Josiah McKenna not because you were sent, but because you stay to share his burdens and his home? Dorothy felt the weight of every label she'd ever worn fall away. I do, she said. I choose this life. Josiah spoke his vows first. He didn't dress them up. I was a man who stopped believing the world could be fair, he said. I trusted the land in my hands and nothing else. You came into my life when I had nothing left to give, and somehow you gave me back my children, my home, myself. He paused, breath uneven. I promise I will never look away from you. I will never make you smaller so I can feel bigger. I will stand with you, even when the ground shakes. Dorothy's eyes burned, but she did not look down. "I was taught my whole life to take up less space," she said, "to be grateful for scraps, to disappear quietly." She squeezed his hands. "You saw me, not as a problem to solve, but as a person worth choosing. I promise I will not run when things get hard. I will not be silent when something is wrong. And I will build a home with you, not one that looks perfect, but one that is safe." When the rings were exchanged, a simple silver band for her, Mary's ring for him, the room exhaled. The kiss was brief, not performative, just enough. Applause followed, then laughter, then tears no one tried to hide. Outside, the sun broke through low clouds, lighting the mountain in pale gold. Someone started a fiddle. Children ran between the adults, chasing nothing and everything at once. Dorothy stood among them, Josiah's arm around her shoulders, feeling something unfamiliar and steady settle into her chest. Belonging. Not because she had earned it, not because she had changed herself, but because she had chosen and been chosen in return. A year changed everything. Thunder Ridge no longer looked like a place people survived. It looked like a place they lived. The cabin stood stronger now, new shingles catching the sun, windows repaired and scrubbed clear. Smoke rose steady from the chimney, not rushed, not desperate. The land around it had softened, shaped by hands that worked it with patience instead of fear. Dorothy stood on the porch, one hand resting on her belly, the other shielding her eyes from the late summer light. She was pregnant, 6 months along, and she still moved slower than she used to, but no one mistook that for weakness anymore. In the yard, Josiah laughed. It was still a rare sound, but it came easier now. He was showing Jacob how to split wood safely, guiding the boy's hands, correcting him without raising his voice. Emma sat nearby with a book, reading aloud to Samuel, who followed along with his finger. Lily chased the chickens, her giggles echoing across the ridge. A year ago, this place had held only grief and unfinished anger. Now it held rhythm. Josiah looked up and caught Dorothy watching him. He smiled, not the guarded curve he once wore, but something open. He crossed the yard and climbed the porch steps 2 at a time. "You've been standing too long," he said gently. Dorothy rolled her eyes. "You've said that every day for 3 months." "And I'll keep saying it," he replied, placing a hand over hers on her belly, "until the day you tell me to stop." The baby shifted beneath his palm. Josiah froze. "Did you feel that?" he asked, awe softening his voice. "I did," Dorothy said. "He's strong." "Or she," Josiah corrected with a grin. "Or she," Dorothy agreed. Below them, Pine Hollow had changed too. Harlan's ranch had been broken apart and sold. The new sheriff had been elected quietly. No speeches, no favors owed. People spoke more carefully now, not softer, but truer. And when they spoke of Dorothy Brennan, they did not lower their voices. They spoke with respect. That evening, after the children were asleep, Dorothy and Josiah sat by the fire like they did most nights. The flames crackled low. The house breathed around them. "Do you ever think about the day you arrived?" Josiah asked. Dorothy smiled faintly. "I try not to forget it." "I was sure you'd leave," he admitted. "Everyone else had." "And I was sure I wouldn't last a week," she said. "I thought surviving was the best I could hope for." Josiah reached for her hand. "And now?" Dorothy looked around the room, the table scarred from use, the books stacked neatly, the small shoes by the door. "Now I know I was never meant to disappear," she said. "I was meant to stay." Outside, the wind moved through the trees, not harsh this time, just steady. Thunder Ridge stood quiet beneath the stars, holding a family that had been built not from perfection, but from choice. Sometimes, late at night, Dorothy still remembered the sound of that wagon, the creak of old wood, the cold air biting through her coat, the way she stood alone in the snow, believing, truly believing, that she had been sent away because she was less than other people, less worthy, less desirable, less human. She sat now by the fire, a year later, listening to the steady breathing of her children down the hall, to Josiah's quiet movements as he banked the coals. The same mountains surrounded her, the same land, but nothing felt the same, because she wasn't the same. "I thought being chosen meant someone finally tolerating me," she said softly, almost to herself. "I didn't know it could mean being seen." Josiah didn't answer right away. He never rushed moments like this anymore. "You were never invisible," he said at last. "People just looked past what made them uncomfortable." Dorothy smiled faintly. All her life, others had measured her with careless eyes, by her body, by her silence, by how easy it was to push her aside. And for too long, she had agreed with them, until one week on a mountain taught her something different. That worth is not proven by beauty, or by approval, or by how small you can make yourself. Worth is revealed in what you choose to protect, in what you refuse to abandon, in how you stand when leaving would be easier. She had stood, not perfectly, not bravely at first, but she had stayed, and in staying, she had found something the world had told her she didn't deserve, a home, a family, a life that did not ask her to disappear. The fire crackled softly. Outside, Thunder Ridge rested under the stars, quiet, unremarkable to anyone passing by. But to Dorothy, it was proof that a person's value is not decided by the first place they are sent to, but by the place they finally choose to remain. Out here, on the edge of the old frontier, people used to believe something simple, that the law was written on paper, that strength lived in a man's hands, and that worth could be judged at a glance. But stories like Dorothy's remind us that none of that was ever true. Real power doesn't shout. Real courage doesn't always carry a gun. And real value isn't measured by how someone looks when they first arrive, but by what they build when they're finally allowed to stay. In a land where the law on paper was often weaker than the gun on a man's hip, people still had a choice: to stand behind fear or to stand behind what's right. And now, before we leave Thunder Ridge behind, I want to ask you something, honestly. Where are you right now as this story comes to an end? Are you at home, winding down after a long day? On the road, listening through the noise of the world? Or awake late at night, needing a reminder that people can still choose kindness? And one more thing. Do you think Dorothy's strength was always there? Or do you think it was something she had to grow into? Tell me in the comments below. I read every one. And if you're ready for another story about unlikely love, quiet courage, and people who refuse to disappear, stay with me.